Look at my poor ex, Renata said, loud enough to carry. Still broke. Still nobody. And apparently he's got himself an imaginary wife now. She turned to me with a smile that had been sharpening itself for 8 years. Still poor, still alone, Desmond? Did you invent a wife just to save face? 3 years now, I said. You still haven't changed, have you? So where is this mystery wife? Or does she only live in your head? She's on her way. Sure she is. She laughed, playing to the small crowd she'd gathered. Inventing an entire marriage. Almost sad. I run a construction and infrastructure company, I said. We just closed a contract with the city. She had no idea. 2 days before that conversation, I'd signed a $412 million infrastructure contract with the city of Chicago. Who I am. My name is Desmond Cole. I'm 42, and for most of my adult life I believed one thing. A man's worth isn't decided by what people say about him at a party. It's decided by what he builds when no one is watching. 20 years in construction taught me that. Marriage taught me the same lesson twice as hard. 8 years ago, my ex-wife walked out of our house on the south side of Chicago with 2 suitcases and an expression that suggested she'd already left long before she packed the first one. I didn't chase her down the street. I didn't call her family begging for a second chance. I let her go, and I went quiet. People mistake quiet for broken. Those two things have never been the same. Which brings me to a Saturday night in October, in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Marriott on Michigan Avenue, at our high school reunion, the first one I'd bothered to attend since the divorce. I was near the back with a glass of ice water, listening to my ex-wife's laugh roll across the room the way it always did when she thought she'd won something. Look at Desmond over there, Renata announced, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. Still wearing that same tired face. 8 years since the divorce and the man's still alone. Some men just never climb out of the hole they dig for themselves. Her friends laughed. Someone I didn't recognize added, didn't he used to talk about building something big? Guess all that's left is the ego and a tool belt. I didn't answer. I just watched. And here's the part nobody in that ballroom knew yet, the part one needs you to sit with for a second. 2 days before that reunion, my legal team had sent over the final paperwork on a $412 million infrastructure contract with the city of Chicago. 18 months of work, coming down to one last signature. My name was on that contract. Not a company name, mine. Renata didn't know that. There was a second thing happening in that ballroom that night, something I didn't fully understand yet either. A man standing beside my ex-wife kept glancing at my watch instead of my face, not admiring it, measuring it, like he was quietly solving a math problem he didn't want anyone to catch him working on. Before we go further, I want you to remember something my grandmother used to say from her porch, rocking in a chair that had been creaking since before I was born. Baby, the folks who talk loudest about your failures are usually the ones most afraid you're about to prove them wrong. She was right about a lot of things. She was right about this. 2 days earlier. Let me take you back to where this story actually starts. It was a gray Chicago Thursday, the kind of sky that can't decide if it wants to rain. I was in my truck on Lake Shore Drive, coffee going cold in the cup holder, when the reunion invitation buzzed through on my phone. My old friend Joss had been pushing me to go. You spent 8 years quietly rebuilding your life, Desmond, she said on the phone, in that same no-nonsense tone she'd had since 10th grade. Go to that reunion, not to prove anything. Just to close the door properly. I almost said no. I'd built a good, quiet life, a home in the Gold Coast, a wife who loved me steadily and surely, work that mattered. I didn't need anyone's approval from that gymnasium-turned-ballroom to feel like a man. But something in me wanted to walk back into that room one more time, not as the man who left broken, but simply as myself. So Saturday night, I put on a plain charcoal suit, nothing flashy, and drove to the Marriott alone. Naomi had a foundation board meeting running late. She runs an education fund for kids across the south and west sides, work she cares about more than any gala. She told me she'd catch up with me there. The lobby smelled like fresh flowers and expensive coffee. A jazz trio played low near the elevators. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, streetlights blurring gold and red on the wet pavement. I straightened my jacket in the elevator mirror, took a slow breath, and reminded myself why I'd come, not to prove anything, just to close a door that had been left cracked open for 8 years. The ballroom. I walked in under gold chandeliers and low jazz, and the first face I saw was Renata's. She smiled the way people smile when they think they've already won. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, stepping closer, drink in hand, her voice pitched for the room. "Still alone, Desmond? Or are you still out there swinging a hammer for a living, hoping somebody notices?" I looked her in the eye. "Calm. Steady." "No," I said. "I'm married." For one full second, the cluster of old classmates around her went quiet. Then Renata laughed, big, performative, the kind meant to convince the room before it convinces the person laughing. "Married? That's rich, Desmond. Truly." She turned to her small audience. "Y'all hear this? Desmond says he's married. A man who couldn't build a stable life in 8 years suddenly has a wife nobody's ever heard of." I kept my voice even. 3 years now. 3 years, she repeated, like the words tasted strange. "And where is this mystery wife tonight? Home? Or maybe she doesn't exist outside your head?" Standing beside her was a man I didn't recognize, tall, groomed to the last inch, wearing a suit that cost more than it fit him. Marcus. I'd learn his name soon enough. What I noticed first wasn't his face, it was his eyes, which kept dropping to my wrist, to the plain steel watch I'd worn for 6 years, my father's watch. He wasn't looking at it the way a man looks at something he admires. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a number he's trying to solve. "She's finishing up a meeting," I said simply. "She'll be here soon." Renata waved a hand like she was swatting a fly. "Still nothing, Desmond. Still poor, still alone, even if you've invented somebody to sit next to you tonight." I let it land and pass through without taking root. Anger is a poor tenant, let it stay too long and it stops paying rent and starts tearing up the walls. I'd learned that the hard way. What the marriage actually cost. Because the truth is, her words dragged me somewhere I hadn't let myself revisit in years. I remembered a night on the south side, rain coming down hard enough to bounce off the pavement outside a downtown conference center. I stood there in a thin, soaked jacket, waiting for Renata to finish a networking event for a certification program she wanted badly. I'd sold my grandfather's set of framing tools 2 weeks earlier, the good steel ones I'd used to put myself through my first construction jobs, just so she could afford the enrollment fee. I never told her where the money came from. I didn't need her gratitude. I needed her to have a real shot. When she finally came outside and saw me standing there drenched, she didn't say thank you. She looked at me like an inconvenience and asked why I looked so pathetic. I said nothing. I said nothing most nights of that marriage. I thought silence was patience. I know better now. There were other nights like it, smaller in size but not in weight. The year I picked up double shifts on a warehouse renovation just to cover the deposit on her sister's wedding gift, and she told her mother it had been her own idea, her own money. The Thanksgiving I drove 4 hours round trip to fix her cousin's water heater for free because it made the family look good, and came home to a cold plate on the counter and a closed bedroom door. None of it had felt like sacrifice at the time. It had felt like love, the only way I knew how to speak it. I understand now that a man can pour his whole self into a cup someone else has already decided not to drink from. The watch and the wife. Marcus leaned toward Renata and murmured something I couldn't quite hear, his eyes flicking to me again, a quick, calculating glance, gone as fast as it came. Renata didn't notice, she was too busy performing for an audience that was slowly losing interest. "My wife had a late meeting downtown," I said again, steady. "She'll be here." "Sure she will," Renata said, rolling her eyes toward her friends for approval. "A whole imaginary wife. That's almost sad, Desmond." I checked the time. Naomi's meeting should have wrapped 20 minutes earlier. Renata had just humiliated a man in front of an entire ballroom over a wife she was certain didn't exist. She pressed further, emboldened by the laughter around her. You know what the saddest part is? You actually thought you'd amount to something. All the talk back in school about building something real. And look at you. Same tired suit, same tired face. Some men just don't have it in them. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that if I just worked hard enough, quiet enough, long enough, she'd eventually see me. I thought about the man I used to be, standing outside that conference center in the rain, believing his worth was something he had to earn one soaked, silent night at a time. I wasn't that man anymore. I hadn't been for years. Renata just hadn't gotten the memo. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by someone for so long it starts to feel like weather, something you live under instead of something you fight. I'd stopped fighting it a long time ago. Not because I'd given up, but because I'd found something better to spend my energy on, building a life so steady, so quiet, that it no longer needed anyone's belief to stand up straight. You should slow down, I said quietly, not unkind, just factual. You're about to say something you can't take back. She laughed again, but this time something uncertain flickered behind her eyes before her composure smoothed back over it. Slow down for what? I have my life together. I have Marcus. She pulled him half a step closer, presenting him like an exhibit. And you have what? A tool belt and an imaginary wife. Behind her, I noticed a woman from our senior year, Farah. Sharp-eyed, quiet, the kind of person who never spoke until she had something worth saying. She was watching the whole exchange with her arms folded and her jaw set. In high school she'd been the one who told you the truth about your science project when everyone else said it was fine. These days she worked compliance audits, verifying vendors on municipal contracts, the kind of job that trains you to notice the details most people never think to look for. Some things about a person don't change. I was grateful, in that moment, that this was one of them. She caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, as if she already knew something the rest of the room didn't. The door opens. Near the entrance, I heard the particular hush that falls over a crowd right before it turns to face something. Renata hadn't noticed yet. She was still talking, still certain the ground beneath her was solid. It wasn't. Not anymore. The far doors opened fully, and the jazz seemed to dim half a step, the way a room does when it decides, unprompted, that something important has just walked in. Naomi. She wore a deep midnight blue gown, curls swept up, moving through that ballroom the way people move when they've never once needed a room's permission to belong in it. Heads turned. Someone near the bar whispered to a friend, just loud enough for me to catch, "Is that Cole? The one who runs the education fund for the South and West Side schools?" Renata turned to see what everyone else was looking at. I watched the color drain slowly from her face. Naomi crossed the room straight to me, took my hand in both of hers, and kissed my cheek in front of everyone. "Sorry I'm late, baby," she said, warm and unhurried. "That meeting ran long." Before she answered Renata's unspoken question, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear. "Farah called me on the way over," she murmured. "She's here, and I just got the notification, the infrastructure contract closed this afternoon." That last signature finally came through. 412. Done. It landed quiet and steady in my chest, the way good news does once you've stopped needing it to prove anything to anyone but yourself. Naomi straightened, turned to Renata, and answered her question directly, no performance in it at all. "Yes, I'm his wife. And I'm very proud of my husband. My wife. Not a rumor. Not an invention." Standing right there, in a room that had spent the last 20 minutes calling her imaginary. The room had gone almost silent. Renata tried to recover, forcing a thin laugh. "Well, that's wonderful. I had no idea Desmond had." She glanced at me, then back at Naomi. "Someone like you. Most people don't take the time to find out what someone actually has," Naomi said, still calm, still warm. No malice in it, just fact. I thought, standing there, about the first time I'd met Naomi, 3.5 years earlier, at a community fundraiser in Bronzeville, where she'd been quietly writing checks nobody had asked her to write and fixing problems nobody had asked her to fix. She hadn't known who I was that night either. She'd simply watched me help an elderly man carry folding chairs back to a supply closet after the event ended, long after anyone with something to prove would have gone home. "Most men leave once the cameras stop," she'd said. I told her I wasn't most men. She said she'd believe that when she saw it proven over time, not over one night. It took 2 years of steady, unremarkable Tuesdays for her to believe it. That's the thing nobody in that ballroom understood about either of us. We hadn't built what we had on one grand gesture. We'd built it the way I built everything else, one honest day at a time, with nobody watching, until eventually somebody did. The cracks. I watched something shift behind Renata's eyes, not full understanding yet, but the first crack in the foundation. She looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in 8 years, and I could see her running numbers she didn't have access to. The tailored suit that wasn't flashy but wasn't cheap, the watch Marcus kept eyeing, the woman standing next to me whom half the room recognized on sight. "So," she said carefully, testing the ground, "what exactly do you do now, Desmond?" "Still in construction?" "I run a construction and infrastructure company," I said simply. "We just closed a contract with the city." I didn't say the number. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need volume, they just need time to sink in. Marcus shifted his weight beside her, and for the first time all night he looked genuinely uneasy. He'd spent the whole evening sizing me up like a problem to be solved, and now the math wasn't adding up the way he'd expected. I caught the tail end of something he murmured low to Renata, didn't say anything about him actually having money. Renata shot him a sharp look, but it was too late. I'd heard enough to understand that whatever Marcus had promised her, it had never once accounted for the possibility that I might be the one standing taller by the end of the night. That's great, Desmond," she said, her voice climbing an octave too high. "Really great. I'm happy for you." She didn't sound happy. She sounded like a woman watching the floor tilt slowly beneath her heels. I thought about the version of myself who used to stand in rooms like this, waiting for exactly this kind of validation the moment someone finally looked impressed. I used to think that moment would feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like nothing at all, which was its own kind of freedom. Across the room, Farah was still watching, arms folded, waiting for something. I didn't know yet what she knew. I only knew, from the look on her face, that Renata's night was nowhere close to over. "You know," Renata said, trying to steady herself, forcing brightness back into her voice, "we should all catch up properly. Marcus and I would love to hear more about the business." "Wouldn't we, Marcus?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He was still watching me the way a man watches a door he suspects is about to open onto something he doesn't want walked through. Farah steps in. Farah didn't wait for an invitation. She crossed the room with the unhurried stride of someone who'd been waiting years for the right moment to say something out loud. "Renata," she said, her voice carrying clean across the circle of onlookers. "That's enough." Renata blinked, caught off guard. "Farah, this doesn't concern you." "It does, actually." Farah's arms stayed folded, her tone level. "Because some of us have known for years exactly what kind of man Desmond is, and we've watched you build an entire evening around pretending otherwise." She let the room settle into full silence. "What most people here don't know is that for the last 6 years, Desmond has quietly funded the entire scholarship endowment at our old high school. Every scholarship kid you've all clapped for at the alumni dinners, that's him. He never put his name on a plaque. He never told anyone, not even me. I found out by accident going through the fund's paperwork last spring." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone near the back said, "Wait, that's been Desmond this whole time?" Something tightened and loosened in my chest at once. I thought of the first check I'd written 6 years earlier, alone at my kitchen table past midnight, telling myself it didn't need my name attached to matter. I'd expected pride, hearing it said aloud in a room. Instead I felt oddly exposed, like a door I'd kept locked out of habit had swung open without my permission. I never reached for credit. I never had. Renata's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open, no comeback ready. Farah wasn't finished. She turned to Marcus. And you might want to sit this next part out quietly, because I know exactly what you tried to do to Desmond's company 2 years ago. The falsified subcontractor bid. The shell paperwork routed through a fake vendor account to skim off a city project. It didn't work, because Desmond's team caught it before it went anywhere. But I have no doubt Renata knew. Didn't you, Renata? You covered for him. The color left Renata's face entirely. She turned to Marcus, her voice cracking. You told me that was a misunderstanding. Don't, Marcus said flatly, stepping back half a step, distancing himself in real time. Don't make this about me right now. His hand tightened around his glass, the practiced ease sliding off his face for half a second, replaced by something colder, more calculating, the same look he'd worn all night studying my watch. A man running the numbers on an exit, not an apology. A woman near the punch table murmured to her husband, I always wondered how Marcus afforded that condo on nothing but consulting fees. Word travels fast in a room that's already decided to stop being polite. Joss appeared at my elbow, arms crossed, watching Renata the way you'd watch weather rolling in that you'd already predicted years ago. I told you closing the door properly might take the door off its hinges, she murmured, low enough only for me. I almost laughed. The second reveal. Renata, still reeling, turned back to the small circle of classmates who'd egged her on all night, searching for the laughter that had backed her up 20 minutes earlier. She found none of it. A few had already drifted toward the bar, suddenly very interested in refreshing their drinks. Marcus stepping back from her wasn't just betrayal, it confirmed the one fear Renata had never said out loud, not even to herself, that she'd traded a loyal man for status, and given her loyalty to a man who was never actually loyal to anything but his own comfort. Her deepest wish had always been simple, to never again feel like the woman standing outside in the rain, waiting on someone else's ambition to notice her. But choosing status over substance meant defending a man who, the moment the room turned against him, wouldn't defend her back. That contradiction is what broke her in front of everyone, not the accusation itself, but the proof that she'd built her second chance on exactly the kind of abandonment she thought she'd escaped. She turned back to me, desperation replacing the arrogance that had carried her through the evening. Desmond, you knew about this, about Marcus's scheme. And you never said anything? I knew, I said quietly. My legal team caught it. We handled it without needing to make a scene. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time in 8 years. Why didn't you ever tell me? Naomi answered before I could, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. Because there's something else you should know, Renata. Desmond knew about you and Marcus long before the divorce was ever filed. Years before. The room went still enough that I could hear ice shifting in a glass 3 feet away. Renata's eyes went wide, then filled, her composure finally breaking all the way through. You knew this whole time? I nodded once. I knew. Then why didn't you say something? Why did you just let it happen? Because for a long time, I said, my voice steady, no anger left in it, just plain truth, I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, worked hard enough, you'd eventually choose me on your own. I didn't want to force it. I wanted you to see me. I paused. You never did. And eventually, I stopped needing you to. Renata turned to Marcus one last time, her voice breaking into something raw. You told me you'd give me the life Desmond never could. You said I'd never have to worry again. What happened to all of that? Marcus looked at her with something close to contempt. Don't put that on me right now. Don't put it on me? Her voice cracked louder, past caring who heard. I lied for you. I told my own mother that condo was legitimate. I told everyone in this room tonight that you were the better choice. She was shaking, champagne trembling in her hand, a little of it spilling onto her wrist without her noticing. Marcus straightened his jacket, already halfway to leaving in his mind if not yet in his feet. That sounds like a you problem, Renata. Somewhere behind me, someone murmured, not unkindly, Lord have mercy. The way people do when they've watched a slow-motion collision they saw coming from a mile off. The crowd around them had thinned considerably, people quietly stepping back from the wreckage, no one wanting to stand too close when the rest of it came down. A few of the classmates who'd been laughing loudest 20 minutes earlier were now studying their shoes, their drinks, the middle distance anywhere but Renata's face. Walking out. I stood there with my wife's hand in mine and felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet, settled stillness. The feeling of a door finally closing all the way after being left cracked open for 8 years. I'd imagined this moment differently on plenty of nights, imagined myself saying something cutting, something that would land the way her words used to land on me. Standing there, the words never came. And I realized I didn't want them to. There's a version of justice that shouts, and there's a version that simply stands still while the truth does the work for you. I'd spent 8 years learning the difference. Renata wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the wreckage of her own evening, scattered across the marble floor of a ballroom on Michigan Avenue, in front of everyone she'd once wanted so badly to impress. Farah stepped back beside me for a moment. "I probably should have said something years ago," she said quietly. "You said it exactly when it needed saying," I told her. "Not a minute before." Joss squeezed my shoulder once, a small, wordless gesture that said more than any speech could. "Some friendships don't need much," she said. "They just need someone standing next to you when the ground shifts." I didn't feel the need to say anything else to Renata. There was nothing left to prove, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I turned to Naomi, and without a word passing between us, we both understood it was time to go. Behind me, Renata's voice, thinner now, stripped of every ounce of performance, "Desmond, wait. Please, just wait a second." I didn't turn around. The drive home. We walked out of the Marriott into a clear October night. Michigan Avenue was quiet except for the occasional taxi and the wind coming soft off the lake. I opened the car door for Naomi the way I always do, and we drove north past storefronts glowing gold in the evening light, toward home on the Gold Coast. Neither of us spoke for a few blocks. I kept both hands steady on the wheel, watching the lit storefronts slide by, a bakery closing up, a doorman checking his phone under an awning. Ordinary Chicago going about its ordinary evening, entirely unaware of what had just happened 3 blocks south. There's something grounding about a city that keeps moving no matter what's just fallen apart or come together inside one of its ballrooms. I thought about Naomi's father then, a retired electrician who'd spent 30 years wiring houses on the west side before his knees gave out. She'd told me once, early on, that she hadn't fallen for me despite the tool belt. She'd fallen for me because of it, because she'd grown up watching a man come home with calloused hands and called it a good day's work. It wasn't nostalgia when she said it. It was recognition. Naomi finally broke the silence, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You never told me the whole story," she said. "About knowing about the notebook." I glanced at her. "What notebook?" "The one in the bottom drawer of your old desk," she said gently. "I found it 2 years ago cleaning out the study. Pages and pages of things Renata used to say to you, every insult, every put-down. Dated, almost like you were keeping records." She paused. "I never brought it up. I wasn't angry. I just didn't understand it. Not until tonight." I kept my eyes on the road for a moment before answering. I wasn't keeping it to use against her. I was keeping it so I wouldn't forget who I used to let define me. I exhaled slowly. Every time I thought about giving up on myself, I'd read a page, not for the sting of it, for the reminder. Never again. I could still recall the exact weight of that notebook in my palm on the nights I don't like remembering, flipping to a page dated some ordinary Tuesday, reading her old words back to myself like scripture I needed to disprove. It never once made me hate her. It just made sure I never mistook her voice for my own. Naomi squeezed my hand. "You could have thrown it away tonight, after all that." "I might now," I said. "I think I finally don't need it anymore." Outside, the lake wind pushed faint static through the cracked window, and neither of us spoke for a moment. I thought about all the nights that notebook had been the only honest conversation I was having with anyone, myself included. Strange, carrying proof of your own worth for years without ever showing it to the one person who might have shared the weight of it. My phone buzzed once at a red light on Oak Street. A text from a number I hadn't saved, though I recognized it instantly. Renata, I'm sorry for tonight. For a lot of things. I looked at it for a long moment, the light still red. Naomi glanced over, not asking, just present. You don't have to answer that tonight, she said quietly. Or ever, if you don't want to. I know, I said, and put the phone face down in the cup holder. Some doors don't need slamming shut. You can just let them ease closed on their own weight. And that's its own kind of answer. We didn't say much the rest of the drive. Some silences don't need filling, they're already complete on their own. The streetlights along Lake Shore Drive blurred past in long gold streaks, and somewhere past the buildings I could just make out the dark line of the lake against a darker sky. Chicago has a way of looking especially honest at night. No pretense left in it, just the water and the wind and whatever's true underneath. I rolled the window down an inch, just enough to let the cold lake air in, and something about it felt like exhaling a breath I'd been holding since a ballroom 3 miles behind us. Home. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, the way Naomi always leaves it warm and steady against the dark. I sat in the car a second longer than I needed to, just taking it in. The quiet street, the house we'd built a real life inside of, my wife waiting beside me instead of walking ahead of me. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, and meant it. I think I actually am. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the hallway a moment, listening to the house settle around me, the furnace kicking on somewhere below, the small ordinary sounds of a life that had nothing left to prove to anybody. Naomi went to put the kettle on, the way she does most nights, whether we need tea or not. It's less about the tea and more about the ritual, 10 quiet minutes standing together in the kitchen before the day is finally allowed to end. I sat at our old oak table, the one we'd bought secondhand our first year together, the one with a faint water ring near the edge that Naomi always says gives it character. I thought about Renata standing in that ballroom, the wreckage of her evening scattered around her heels. I thought about Marcus stepping back from her without a second thought. I thought about 8 years of silence, of quiet work, of choosing not to explain myself to anyone who'd already decided who I was. I thought too about the man I used to be at a smaller version of this same table, in a smaller apartment on the south side, doing math in his head at 2 a.m. Trying to make a single paycheck stretch across two people's expectations. That man would not have believed this kitchen, this quiet, this woman across the table from him. I was grateful, sitting there, that I hadn't needed him to believe it. I just needed to keep showing up for it one ordinary evening at a time, until it became real enough to sit inside of. I thought about my grandmother's porch, and the way she used to say a man's worth lies in what he builds when nobody's watching. I'd spent 8 years testing whether that was true, half hoping it wasn't. Sitting at that steady oak table, I finally believed her all the way through, not as a saying anymore, but as something lived. Naomi set 2 mugs down, sat across from me, and didn't ask anything else that night. She just let the quiet sit there with us, comfortable and unhurried, the way good quiet does between two people who've already said the parts that mattered. Sitting there with the kitchen lamp humming low, I understood something the ballroom would never see. Everyone back at that reunion would remember the gasps, Renata's face going pale, the whole spectacle of it. But none of that was actually the part that mattered to me. What mattered was this: an ordinary, quiet kitchen at the end of an extraordinary night. A woman across the table who'd never once needed me to prove anything to earn her love, and enough peace in my own chest that I didn't feel the pull to replay a single second of what had happened 3 miles south of here. I was simply, finally, home. The morning after. But there was still one conversation left to have, the one that would finally put the whole 8 years to rest. The next morning I stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee, looking toward the trees a few blocks over that lead down to Grant Park. The sky was doing that pale, washed-out gray Chicago does so well in October. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice at the mail carrier, then thought better of it. Ordinary sounds, ordinary morning, the kind I used to take for granted before I understood how rare a peaceful morning actually is. Naomi came out a few minutes later, wrapped in the old cardigan she refuses to throw away no matter how many new ones I buy her, and handed me a second cup even though I still had one going cold in my hand. She always says a cold cup of coffee is just a reminder to slow down, not a mistake to fix. She stood beside me a while before speaking. You knew about the affair for years before the divorce, she said quietly. You stayed anyway. You kept trying. I did, I said. Why? I thought about it honestly before answering. Because I believed if I was successful enough, patient enough, quiet enough, she'd eventually see what she had. I thought if I proved myself, she'd finally choose me the way I chose her. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching the steam curl into the cold air. But somewhere along the way, I stopped needing her to see it. I just needed to see it myself. Naomi studied me the way she does when she's about to ask the real question underneath the question. Do you hate her? After everything? I smiled, small but real, the first easy smile I think I'd let myself have since the night before. No. I forgave her a long time ago. What I hadn't forgiven, not until last night, was the version of myself who used to believe he had to earn the right to be loved. The man standing in the rain outside that conference center, thinking soaked shoes and an empty wallet were the price of being worth something. I shook my head slowly. I don't owe anybody proof anymore. Not her. Not that ballroom. Not even myself. Naomi leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stood there a long while, coffee going lukewarm in our hands, watching the wind move through the trees toward Grant Park. The real win of the night before hadn't been watching Renata's world come apart in that ballroom. It wasn't the scholarship reveal, or Marcus's fraud finally seeing daylight, or even the moment Naomi walked in wearing the deep blue dress and turned every head in the room. The real win was quieter than all of that. It was standing on my own back porch the next morning, coffee in hand, my wife beside me, finally free of the need for anyone's applause. No ballroom gives you that. No confrontation, no reveal, no perfectly timed entrance in midnight blue can hand you that kind of peace. You have to build it yourself, morning by ordinary morning, long after anyone's watching to see whether you will. I thought about the notebook still sitting in that bottom drawer, and decided, standing there in the cold morning air, that I would finally let it go. Not in anger, not as some gesture for anyone else to witness, but quietly, the way I'd done most things that actually mattered in my life. Some chapters don't need a dramatic close. They just need you to stop turning back to reread them. Afterward. Later that afternoon, I called Joss to thank her properly for pushing me to go. You knew, didn't you? I said. That something like this might happen. I didn't know the details, she laughed. I just knew you were finally ready to stop carrying it alone. Then, softer, your grandmother would have been proud of how you handled that room, Desmond. Calm as still water. She used to tell me patience wasn't the same as doing nothing. Took me about 20 years to understand what she meant by that, I said. Most of us take 20 years to understand the things our grandmothers said in about 10 seconds, Joss said, and I could hear the smile in it. That's just how wisdom works. It waits for you. I sat with that a while after we hung up. Some inheritances aren't money or land. Some of them are simply the way a person taught you to carry yourself when the whole room is waiting for you to break.